What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And Regional Championship Minneapolis just finished up, and I'm here to bring you the breakdown of the entire event. Of course, we are going to be going over the Day 1 and Day 2 metagame breakdown, looking at some of the conversion rates, and of course, going over the top 8, and then finally some thoughts as we wrap up the event and we get ready for a Regional Championship in Hartford, Connecticut that's going to be going on in just a few weekends. So really exciting stuff going on. We saw a very quick turnaround here because the European Regional Championship was was a weekend ago, and then of course yesterday, as you were seeing this video, we finished up this regional championship. And players usually have a pretty big gap in between those two major regional championships, and there was even a bigger gap from the first one to the second one in the previous regional championship season. But this time, players only having a few weeks in between this one and Hartford. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the metagame changes and adapts to some of the changes that we actually saw this weekend in Minneapolis. So if you want to check that out, make sure that you don't go anywhere. But I need to ask you one big favor, that if you are not already subscribed to the channel and you enjoy anything that you see here today, you enjoy the breakdowns, whether it's the other modern standard videos, whatever the case may be, I just ask that you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you know when future videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And of course, if you enjoy anything going on in this video, please consider leaving a like on the video as well. I do greatly appreciate that. Finally, if you want even more content, go ahead and check out the description down below where we have a link to the Discord server as well as our Twitch channel and our Casual Spikes podcast YouTube channel, where me and my co-host Randy over at MTG with Randy talk a lot about the things going on in competitive Magic. We're even going to be further breaking down this event over there and giving, of course, our own thoughts and opinions on what happened over the course of the weekend, and of course breaking down that information for you there as well, and kind of the thought process players are going to be going through when kind of identifying and figure out what decks they're actually going to play at this next regional championship. Lastly, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. If you use my code in the description down below, you will get 5% off your monthly subscription, where you can basically rent and play whatever decks you want for whatever format in whatever high or low stakes events that you want. And one of the benefits of getting to do this is the fact that you don't have to necessarily spend a bunch of money up front to buy one particular deck. You have the flexibility to play essentially whatever you want, practice whatever you want. It's been a great tool for me in my playtesting and just getting to, obviously, of course, create content for the channel. So if that is something that interests you and that, you know, you just love playing on Magic Online, consider using my code in the description down below for Manatraders and signing up over there. And again, you will get 5% off your monthly subscription. I want to thank Manatraders for being a sponsor of the channel. Now let's go ahead and get into the Day 1 metagame breakdown for Regional Championship Minneapolis. So we're going to start with the Day 1 metagame breakdown, as Is It Prowess definitely crushed expectations, to say the least. 447 players registered the deck, coming in at a 33.5% metagame share. Over a third of the metagame, very slightly, but over a third of the metagame was Is It Prowess. Now, I know in our previous video kind of predicting what we were going to expect from Minneapolis, I thought if this deck got up to like 20%, like I would say like very comfortably like 20, maybe a little bit over that it would have been, you know, kind of it wouldn't have been surprising, I would say. The fact that it is like another 13% higher than that estimation is absolutely crazy, and just kind of goes to show how much people like actually respect this as a prowess deck, because it is a very consistent deck. It's very powerful, punishes a lot of slow starts. It's just kind of solidified itself as one of the best decks. And there's actually another regional championship going on overseas. I believe it was like the one of like the I think it was like Japan, and Is It Prowess ended up winning that whole event, was also the overwhelming majority of that field too, which is very interesting. But yeah, Is It Prowess 33.5%, absolutely insane. Jeskai Oculus significantly down to almost about 21%, like 20.8% lower than the Is It Prowess deck. But Jeskai Oculus was a deck that we identified as being a deck that is in a pretty good position to be able to handle some of the stuff going on in this Is It Prowess deck. I think a lot of what Is It Prowess is able to do is the fact that Slickshot Show-Off is a very powerful card, and it has flying, and just ends up outputting an insane amount of damage, on top of like Corey Steelcutter also just blanking a lot of the targeted removal, and just also making like haste, trample attackers that are going to, you know, be able to deal massive amounts of damage, and of course Monstrous Rage being a very big threat of its own. Jeskai Oculus does make some pretty big flyers and can gum up the ground relatively easily, thanks to cards like Abhorrent Oculus, and with cards like Prophecytic Memory kind of helping the deck also to make these really big flyers that potentially could survive combat, or at least trade with a slick shot show off, and then be able to use cards like Helping Hand to kind of bring things back, and then end up kind of filtering for more cards and finding more removal, and being able to get rid of like Corey Stonecutter is huge. Jeskai Oculus does seem like it was a pretty good counter to the Is It Prowess deck, and it kind of showed over the course of the weekend that it was actually pretty good at doing that, plus just being in general a very good deck. Mono Red Aggro, we talked about taking a little bit of a hit because of Is It Prowess. Is It Prowess being, I think, the better aggro deck, even though Mono Red, I would think, it just feels like it just has a better matchup against Is It Prowess than kind of the other way around. I think that Is It Aggro is also a deck that will just punish a lot of other decks for having some really slow starts here. And it did take a little bit of a hit. I believe it was like 12% of the metagame or something like that. 10 or 12% of the metagame in Europe, down to 7.8% here in the United States. Obviously, that big in percentage, especially with how many players are actually registered for this event, is obviously kind of tracks a little bit, but we do see it at a little bit of a lower expected metagame share than I don't think we necessarily expected. We thought it was going to take a nosedive, or rather it was going to take a little bit of a hit, not really a nosedive, but from like 10+% to like almost 8%. That was a little bit of a dip there. I think that is in part to Is It Prowess seemingly being the best aggro deck that you could be playing right now. Zur Overlords starting to make a comeback, was I think the 5th or 6th most played deck at the European Regional Championship, showing up here at 4th. Then we have Azorius Omniscience, a deck that has not really come out of nowhere, but has just seemingly done very well here as of late. Sorry about that. Jeskai Control, another Jeskai deck that we kind of talked about before, where I felt like the Jeskai decks were very well positioned here. Jeskai Oculus being this kind of deck that can have a pretty aggressive plan and also kind of punish slow starts with like the prof draws, but also just has some pretty good staying power overall. Jeskai Control also just being a very solid deck, having access to temporary lockdown for a lot of the small things going on in the Is It Prowess deck and some of the other aggro decks going on in the format, as well as just having some really good cards that kind of help you just get back into the game. Shiko is a big value engine on top of being a pretty big creature that is going to attack for a lot of damage in the air is always really nice. Orzhov Pixie being the most played Pixie deck outside of Esper, which we did predict would kind of take a pretty steep nosedive here, and I would say when we look down a little bit further, 2.6% of the metagame versus like the 10+% that it was in the other one. That's an absolutely massive hit, seeing it dwindle down that low. Now, of course, if you kind of take into the totality of the Pixie archetype here, which even Orzhov Pixie took a little bit of dive as well, or took a little bit of a dip from like 4.5-ish% down to about 3.5%. These Pixie decks just are kind of falling by the wayside in favor of these Jeskai strategies and Is It Prowess, and even some old format favorites in Zur, Mono Red Aggro, and of course the Azorius Omniscience deck. Mono Black Demons showing up here at 2.4%. Azorius Control at 2.3%. Gruul Mice at 1.6%. Golgari Midrange at 1%. Abzan Pixie, which is a pretty interesting idea there. You see with like Skirmish Rhino being another one of the cards that the deck is opting to play, of course, on top of Nurturing Pixie at 0.7%, and then 9.7% of the other decks of the metagame. So obviously here, I think a few of our predictions did come correct here. I think that a lot of players kind of opted for these Jeskai decks, seem more so Oculus over the control decks. I think the controller decks are definitely a lot harder to play, but hanging around at like over 5% of the metagame is really nice for that deck, on top of Azorius or Jeskai Oculus being, the second most played deck. And of course, Is It Prowess definitely becoming a huge threat to the metagame, and definitely a deck that you are going to need to prepare to play against and be able to be prepared to play against it multiple times throughout the tournament. And we've seen, Esper Pixie take a steep dive, which I thought was going to be a pretty hot take, and turns out it ended up being right. And Mono Red Aggro taking a little bit of hit to its metagame share, but again, I think that was at least kind of expected when players just kind of opting for Is It Prowess, which seems to be the most consistent performing deck. And there was quite a bit of players that ended up actually making day 2 of the event and ended up qualifying for the Pro Tour. Spoiler alert with this deck. Now, the big thing is going into day 2, we want to see exactly what the conversion rate kind of looks like. And as we can kind of see here, if it'll cooperate with me. Well, here's what we got. So Is It Prowess ended up being 35% of the day 2 metagame, which if we look here, 33.5% up to 35%, it ended up having a 2% increase from day 1 to day 2. 115 players making day 2 of the tournament. That is absolutely insane. Normally when you have decks that have a really high percentage, you kind of want to see that percentage go down. You don't want to see it go up, whether it is just 2%, whatever the case may be. Jeskai Oculus, though, 12.7%, 170 players, down to 42 players at 12.8%. Xur Overlords being the third most played deck, 8.5%. That is an upgrade. Azorius Omniscience taking a little bit of a hit here, going from 6.4% down to 5.5%, but still kind of okay. Mono Red Aggro, 5.2% of the metagame. Dimir Midrange, 4.6%. Jeskai Control, 4.3%. Mono Black Demons at 3.7%. Esper Pixie actually being the best converting Pixie deck at 3% of the metagame. Orzhov Pixie at 2.4%. Gruul Mice Azorius Control. Abzan Pixie, Gorgori Midrange, and Selesnya tokens kind of rounding it out, with 30 other decks being 9.1% of the metagame. Another crazy thing, is it prowess? The fact that it is then now 35% of the field going into day 2 is absolutely nuts. But really a lot not really changing at the top 2 spots. Xur Overlords moving up a little bit. Azorius Omniscience moving up a little bit, with Mono Red Aggro moving down a little bit. Jeskai Control going down a little bit, but all in all, still relatively the same metagame. Dimir Midrange actually performing very well. I think that we talked about forever ago why I like Dimir Midrange is the fact that Kaito is an absolutely amazing card. The fact that it is a Planeswalker that's going to get you some card advantage and also be able to attack. It's going to end up growing in size, every single turn that you decide not to draw cards, and can eventually close out a game very quickly. You have Enduring Curiosity that in a lot of these matches that go long, Enduring Curiosity is going to allow you to get in with some of your small flyers, draw a couple of cards, and turns out even Shieldred at this point in time, it seems like a very hard card for a lot of these decks to deal with. So I really like the Dimir Midrange deck there, and that's kind of like the most surprising thing to me is that Dimir Midrange has performed very well, and even Xur Overlords has done pretty well. And I think for Xur Overlords, it's kind of a benefit that the Is It Prowess decks have now started to kind of metagame against each other and playing a little bit slower, playing cards like Drake Hatcher to, be able to have that third toughness for, be able to essentially beat Burst Lightnings and make combat a little more tricky, while also just being able to create flyers that are going to be tough blockers, or, pretty big blockers for the decks that are just playing the 4 copies of Slickshot Show Off, and just being able to trade with it in combat, whatever the case may be, while also still applying pressure in a lot of the other matchups as well. So definitely, I think Xur Overlords was kind of a pretty good pick for this tournament, even though it doesn't really end up performing all that well. I could definitely see the thought process of playing a deck like Xur Overlords, or playing like one of these decks where Is It Prowess is trying to be a little bit slower. I don't think that's necessarily correct. I like being this hyper-aggressive deck. I don't care. You're going to play against the mirror a lot, especially at 35%. It's really hard to not have your deck tuned even a little bit towards that matchup, but I think that it's not the entire field, so I think that if you just kind of go in, you're like, I'm just going to absolutely run over whoever's in front of me, and you make that part of your game plan, I think you're going to be pretty happy a lot of the time over this like slower, like Drake Hatcher type of strategy. I think you can board into it, but I don't necessarily like being that kind of a deck in game 1. And again, Jeskai Oculus, I think, proving that it is one of the better options against a format that is overwhelmingly Is It Prowess. But, that's our look at the day 1 and day 2 metagames of the regional championship in Minneapolis. Let's go ahead and take a look at our top 8 bracket and see who ended up converting these day 2s into top 8s and putting themselves in position to qualify for the Magic World Championship. So here we have the top 8 bracket. Of course, this is after the first set, the quarterfinal matches ended up playing out. So we have Justin Parente on Is It Prowess versus the number 8 seed Tyler Stegman playing the Azorius Omniscience deck. This was an extremely tough matchup, but Justin Parente ended up taking it 2-0, moving on to the semifinals, being the first Is It Prowess player. Then we have Casey Miller versus Jacob Durish. Jeskai Control versus Is It Prowess. So we have 2 Is It Prowess decks, a Control deck, and Azorius Omniscience. Jeskai Control cleanly taking it down 2-0 and moving on to face another Is It Prowess player waiting for them in the semifinals. Then we have Michael DiBenedetto Plummer on Jeskai Oculus versus Jennifer Wang playing the Azorius Omniscience deck, and Michael ended up taking that 2-1 to move on into the semifinals, where they would face the winner of Gabriel Nicholas versus Gregory Johnson, which was another Jeskai Oculus versus Azorius Omniscience deck. And we see the Azorius Omniscience player actually going and taking it down and moving on to the semifinals to face another Jeskai Oculus player. So really neat there. We had essentially 2 Jeskai Oculus and 2 Azorius Omniscience in the same bracket, and they both ended up, splitting it 1-1. two Is It Prowess players in the top 8, and one of them losing, another one winning, with two Azorius Omniscience players. So we had three Azorius Omniscience players, we had two Jeskai Oculus, we had two Is It Prowess, and we had one Jeskai Control player. And we have an Is It Prowess Jeskai Control match versus Jeskai Oculus and Azorius Omniscience. And how this ended up playing out, Justin Parente ended up, I believe, going 0-2 against the Jeskai Control deck. Casey Miller moving on to the finals of the event here, where we go down to the other side of the bracket where we have Michael versus Gregory, and this ended up being over very quickly in favor of Jeskai Oculus, which was absolutely insane because I think that Justin and Casey hadn't even finished game 1 yet, and they were already reporting that that the other semifinal match was over. Which is absolutely crazy. So it ended up setting up a Jeskai Control versus Jeskai Oculus final, which again were two decks that we kind of had as dark horses going into this event. I think that there were very good options to kind of take in a world where Is It Prowess was kind of dominating the format, and turns out to be very true, as both of those decks end up making the finals, where that was my sad attempt at a drum roll, but we actually had Jeskai Control winning the whole event, taking down the Jeskai Oculus deck, which is pretty crazy because I think control decks, especially in Standard, and especially nowadays, are really hard to play just from all the powerful things going on. I think it's hard to want to pick up that style of deck, but then also play it this efficiently and really as masterfully as Casey had all weekend long. When you're playing 18 rounds, 19 rounds of Magic, it gets incredibly difficult, and they did not skip a beat. There were some very amazing plays from the top 8. I believe that we also caught a Jeskai. I believe we also caught Casey on camera at some point too, but just masterful gameplay in the entire top 8 from Casey, and congratulations to them, and of course Michael for moving on and being able to play in not only the Pro Tour but in the World Championship that's going to be taking place later this year. Big huge congratulations to them, all the top 8 players and all the other players that were able to go to the event and play it out. And we're going to go ahead and check out the final standings from the event, check out the top 32 and all the players that ended up actually moving on and qualifying for the Pro Tour, and we're going to wrap it up with some of our thoughts from the event. So here we have the full list of players that have made the top 8 of the event, and of course going through the top 32, because those are all the players that end up qualifying for the Pro Tour. So we have all our top 8 competitors here, and then we have Jeskai Oculus and 3 Prowess decks kind of rounding out the back half of the top 8 here, going 9th through 12th. Then we have 2 Xur Overlord decks after that. Esper Pixie making a top 16 finish, which is really sweet there. Is It Prowess rounding out the top 16, so that gives us 4 Prowess players. That was 6 Prowess players in the top 16, which is, I would say pretty good here. And then we have Orzhov Pixie at 17th, 3 more Is It Prowess players, 18th through 20th. Then we have Jeskai Control, Jeskai Oculus, Mono Red Aggro coming in at 23rd, Mono Black Demons at 24th, another Prowess player at 25th. And then rounding out the back end of the standings, Is It Prowess, Dimir Midrange, Is It Prowess, Jeskai Control, locking it up with 3 Oculus players just outside, which is honestly, that definitely sucks, but it is what it is, and that's a lot of Is It Prowess. Let's do a real quick count here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Is It Prowess players, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then 14, 15. So almost half of the top 8 or half of the top 32 were these Is It Prowess players, which is absolutely insane. And we had a lot of Azorius Omniscient, really 3 of them making the top 8, and that's really all that ended up making it in the top 32, which is pretty insane, honestly. Even some outside of here, we see a bunch of Oculus, we see another Prowess deck, Jeskai Control, Azorius Omniscience. There was the 6th, 7th, and 8th were Azorius Omniscience, and then 38th was the next best performing deck with more Is It Prowess right behind it. Oh my goodness, this deck might actually be the real deal. Who knew a few events into it that Is It Prowess was going to be an absolutely insane deck? So that's just absolutely insane. But that's how the top 32 look. Those are all the players that are going to be moving on to the Pro Tour, which is very exciting. Of course, only the top 2 players end up getting the qualification for the World Championship. So again, congratulations to those players. Now let's go ahead and move on to some final thoughts of the event and something that players are going to have to look forward to when trying to figure out what the heck they're going to do at Hartford here in just a few weeks. So first place I want to start, we absolutely crushed it with our predictions of the event. I think that they might have been, really, I don't think they were like as straightforward, but the fact that Is It Prowess was going to be the most played deck, and by far it was the most played deck. And again, another one of those tournaments where the most played deck in the format put a decent amount of players in the top 8, just couldn't convert that to a win. This time, not really losing in the finals, ended up going out in the semifinals, and a very close. I believe ended up going 3 games. So that was pretty cool, I guess. But, we saw that Esper Pixie kind of took a nosedive. I don't really expect that to change, even with it having a top 32 finish. It's just not a deck. I think that it's not where you want to be, I think, in this format right now. I think that you want to be kind of, either in on speed, where I think we'll kind of continue to see mono red players still kind of hang around in like a decent size of the metagame for a deck at least big enough to where you have to be prepared for that sort of deck. But really going into this, it's going to be now, how does the Is It Prowess players kind of go from here, right? I mean, having, what did we say, like 15 of like the top 32 was Is It Prowess. I mean, this very clearly is like one of the best decks where, yes, it can threaten to win the tournament, but if you're just going to the event to just qualify for the Pro Tour, this is a very acceptable deck to play. It's relatively easy to pick up, and you can learn a lot of the nuances of some of the mirror matches as well as some of the other matches very easily just by putting a little bit of time in with the deck. I mean, it is absolutely insane. I picked it up and played it, for the first time ever, like not that long ago, and ended up 4-1ing a league and winning the mirror match and those kind of things. So really only losing to mono red, which is kind of where I get my basis on. Like the few times I have played it, it just never really feels all that great, even when like you're in a winning position. So ultimately, it's going to be as far as like the Is It Prowess decks are concerned, do you want to be good against the mirror and maybe a little bit softer against everything else? Because like Azorius Omniscience is a deck that has a lot of early interaction, as well as getting to play things like Temporary Lockdown, and their combo can technically go off on turn 4 if they are able to do so. But in a lot of cases too, they're like tapping out on turn 2 or tapping out on turn 3, where you're able to just kind of, assuming that they're not able to leave up interaction or they don't have interaction, they can just die. And really that fact doesn't necessarily change later on in the game. They leave like a window open, and that's all Is It Prowess needs, is just one turn to be able to absolutely go nuclear, get in for a ton of damage, put you to 1, and says, okay, deal with my board. Okay, well, you have to deal with my board and be able to handle 1, potentially 2 haste attackers, or even a flying haste attacker, whatever the case may be. So that's definitely something to be worried about. That said, I think Azorius Omniscience could be a deck that we see a little bit higher numbers going into the event, and we'll kind of make those predictions official once we kind of get into the week of that regional championship. But I think some thoughts to take away from the event: Azorius Omniscient looked absolutely amazing. Ended up being a lot better than I thought it was going to be. Same with the Jeskai Control deck. I really loved what the deck actually had going on. Control decks aren't all that fun. They're not sexy. They're not flashy as people say. Like the Is It Prowess decks, you're definitely gonna get fireworks for that deck. The Jeskai Oculus decks, the same thing. They put out a ton of damage. Then they attack with a FOMO with Delirium, and they get to untap their big flyer, and then they get to put more counter. They get to do all this stuff. There's a lot of cool things going on like with those type of decks. Even the Azorius Omniscience deck, I would say, it has a lot going on. You're drawing a ton of cards. You're 5-for-1ing your opponent. You're putting Omniscience into play. The combo is really cool. All that sort of stuff. There's a lot of cool things going on with that deck. However, like Jeskai Control is not one of those decks where it's doing something big, flashy, whatever the case may be, but I think is a deck that is very solid. And I think kind of going into this, if I'm going to start playtesting and preparing for the regional championship in Hartford, if I am an Is It Prowess player, I'm figuring out how I'm attacking the mirror. I'm probably just building my deck towards just beating the rest of the field, and then using what skills I have and just being able to navigate those matchups as effectively as possible, and not really caring about like the tech and stuff that you have for the mirror match, just really focusing on beating the rest of the field and worried about beating the mirror match kind of going into the sideboard, hoping to steal the first game and then being able to take one of the other 2 post sideboard and making my deck a lot better, which I think you end up getting a lot of points for by just being as fast as you possibly can be, while also still maintaining some of that mid-rangey-esque feeling that the deck has when you get into those games where you're on a 2 or 3 Corey Steelcutter draw, and you're playing stock up, and you're trying to just cast a ton of spells, put a ton of monks into play, and then turn them sideways. I've seen it work against like the Jeskai Oculus deck. That's one of the ways that I've won those games, is just by Corey Steelcutter to turn 2, 3, and 4, and just absolutely outvalue your opponent in that way, making it very hard for them to 1-for-1 your creatures because you're just making 3 of them a turn from, the rest of the game. I also think that you need to be prepared for this Azorius deck. I think that the Azorius Omniscience deck is going to be coming in bigger numbers, and we are going to be doing a deck tech on that deck. Just I think it was one of the sweetest decks from the weekend. Had put the most players in the top 8. I mean, I know that we talked about the next highest player being 38th, but 6th, 7th, and 8th is no small task. I mean, that is an absolutely insane rate, because it is literally just you get the top 8, or you don't even qualify for the Pro Tour, which is kind of neat, I would say, in my eyes. But, that's going to be the stuff that we're going to be following and looking at here over the course of the next few weekends, while, the rest of the regional championships kind of play out. And, of course, that we end off with the United States Regional Championship going on in a few weeks. And we're going to have a preview video for that. We're going to go over some of our own predictions. We're going to kind of reference back to a lot of this information that we have here. So if that is something that you want to see and you want to be notified when that happens, you need to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. Of course, if you enjoyed anything that we talked about here in this video, if you were entertained, whatever the case may be, please consider leaving a like on this video. And of course, leaving a comment down below your thoughts and opinions on, how Regional Championship Minneapolis went. If you're going to be competing at Hartford, whatever the case may be, go ahead and share that information. Feel free to comment down below. I'd love to discuss any questions, comments, or concerns that you have. And go ahead and check out the other links in the description down below if you want even more content from me. But that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.